There are three things that you should never do in life. One, don't tell your girlfriend about your other girlfriend. Two, don't ask your people if they want to leave the biggest trading bloc in the world. And three, don't confuse your relative pronouns. Yes, that's right. Relative pronouns is what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at when to use that, or which, or who, or whom, or whose, when, or where, when you can omit the relative pronoun, and when you can't, and how to pronounce relative clauses correctly. Sounds complicated, but in fact, with this brain and with this donut, I'm going to explain it in a way that's super easy. That's right, easy peasy, relative pronoun-y. So let's do it. Hello and welcome to Let Them Talk TV. Let's begin with a definition. What is a relative pronoun? It's a word that connects two clauses. What is a clause? It's a phrase that has a subject and a verb. For example, I saw a panda bear. That's a clause. It's also a sentence. It has a subject, an object, and a verb. Let's look at another phrase. The panda bear was smoking a cigar. But what if we wanted to put them together into one sentence? I saw a panda bear who, or that, was smoking a cigar. So the relative pronoun, who or that in this case, links the two clauses. The relative pronoun normally comes after the noun. They are called relative clauses, but they can also be called adjectival clauses because it's a series of words that describes an action. In this video, however, I'll be calling them relative clauses. Now, there are two types of relative clauses, and these will help us decide which relative pronoun, if any, we use. The two types of relative clauses are restrictive relative clauses and non-restrictive relative clauses. I will explain this in a moment, but first have a look at this super easy graph. Now this graph is just looking at that or which. However, in this video we will also look at who and its related forms whom and whose, as well as when and where. In non-restrictive relative clauses you can use which but never that. In restrictive relative clauses, you would usually use that, but other forms are possible. I'll explain that later. Only in restrictive relative clauses can you sometimes omit the relative pronoun. What is a non-restrictive relative clause? So you say something and you give an extra bit of information that is not crucial. For example, these donuts are delicious. That's my message. But what if I wanted to add a little colour to my description? These donuts, which are going to make me fat, are delicious. I've added some extra information which doesn't change the basic message that these donuts are delicious. I put the extra information with commas, which I'll indicate by doing this. Yes, this means that there is a comma at the beginning and at the end of the clause. Okay, and in these clauses you always use which and not that. Notice the pronunciation change when you give the extra information. There is a slight pause and the voice changes tone, usually downwards. Listen again. These donuts, which are going to make me fat, are delicious. A couple more examples. This gold coin, which I found on the beach, is 500 years old. So my main message here is that the coin is 500 years old. Wow, isn't that amazing? But what if my main message was that I found it on the beach? Then just switch it around. This gold coin, which is 500 years old, I found on the beach. The letter, which you sent me last week, has still not arrived. If the extra information is about a person, you can use who or whom or whose. Who is a subject pronoun. Whom is an object pronoun. But in reality, who is usually used for both. I'll show you what I mean. Jane, who was here yesterday, ate all the donuts. There, who refers to the subject. Jane, to whom I gave all the donuts, is an accountant. After a preposition, you put whom, never who. However, most of the time, you'll move the preposition to the end of the clause and use who. Jane, who I gave all the donuts to, is an accountant. Whom is quite formal and rarely used, though that you still hear it sometimes.
Mr. Falco, whom I did not invite to sit at this table tonight, is a hungry press agent and fully up to all the tricks of his very slimy trade. Match me, Sidney. Not right this minute, JJ.
And there is one case where we still use whom in everyday conversation. For more information on that, check out this video. You can never omit the relative pronoun from a non-restrictive relative clause. Finally, you can also use whose, which is a possessive before a noun. Jane, whose house is just up the road, loves donuts. Let's move on to restrictive relative clauses. An example. Bring me the donut that is next to the cheese. Okay. If I just say to you, bring me the donut, you'll be rummaging around the house for the correct donut. I have many, and you won't know which one I want. So next to the cheese is crucial information. It cannot be omitted. And in this case, you will usually use that, but there are exceptions, and I'll talk about that in a moment. With restrictive relative clauses, you don't use commas. So for example, let's take the train that leaves at 9:30. Okay, there are many trains leaving that day, so 9:30 is crucial information. Wouldn't you agree? The trousers that I bought yesterday are too small. I have many pairs of trousers. We need to know which one I bought yesterday. That I bought yesterday is crucial information. Can you use which instead of that? Generally, yes. Here's where it gets a little bit complicated. Some English language style guides say that you should use that, not which, in restrictive relative clauses. But other style guides say both are correct. What I explain here are grammatical guidelines, which are open to debate. They are not grammatical rules. You will find many examples from great works of literature where, for example, you use which in a restrictive relative clause. Personally, I prefer that rather than which in restrictive clauses. I feel the sentence usually sounds better. For example, I read an interesting book that's about dolphins, okay? I read an interesting book which is about dolphins. For me, that sounds better, it's clearer. You know it's crucial information. If you use which in this sentence, it could be a non-restrictive relative clause or a restrictive relative clause. So I prefer that, but that's just me. What do you think? Answers in the comments. So perhaps if you're taking an exam or writing formally, you might want to follow this guideline, or you might not. Sometimes though, a speaker might choose to go against the guidelines anyway. For example, in this sentence, I want the donut that man is eating. Okay, you've got two that's next to each other. Well, it doesn't sound so great. By the way, did you know that these two that's can be pronounced differently? The relative pronoun that has a weak form, that, okay? That, with a schwa. For example, this is the book that I told you about. This is the book that I told you about. That as a demonstrative pronoun is always pronounced that. I want that donut. And we say, I want the donut which that man is eating, to avoid having two that's next to each other. By the way, while preparing this video, I wrote this sentence on a Google Doc and the grammar checker told me, no, it's wrong. It tells me that I should say, I want the donut that man is eating. So I'm telling you that just to let you know that the grammar checker can also be wrong, or Google can be wrong, or whatever. In the end, you decide. As I said, these are guidelines, not rules. Here is a rule though. In restrictive relative clauses, you can use that, who, or whom to talk about people. That is more informal. As we said, whom is not often used. This is the man who, or that, informally, robbed the bank. I met a girl who lived on a farm. He is a writer whose books are read by millions. After a preposition, you cannot use that as a relative pronoun. You can only use which or whom. Let's look at an example. Let's go to the cafe in which we met last time. You cannot say in that, so you put in which. But it sounds rather formal. We are talking about a place, so we can replace in which with where, which by the way is called a relative adverb. You can use where after a noun. Let's go to the cafe where we met. Okay? Fine, perfect. However, there is another way. If we really want to use that, we need to move the preposition after the verb. Let's go to the cafe that we met in last week. Okay? Also perfect. You can use all three, but in which is less common. What about this? Do you remember the day on which we first met? Correct. Again, sounds formal. On which day can be replaced by when. Do you remember when we first met? That is possible here too, by putting the preposition at the end. That doesn't sound so natural though, so let's skip that for the moment. A word about pronunciation. Restrictive relative clauses and non-restrictive relative clauses may be pronounced in a different way. Remember what I said about non-restrictive relative clauses. You put them between commas and you take a pause and the voice goes down. In restrictive relative clauses, the phrase is said in a single flat tone without a pause. For example, my sister, who lives in Muswell Hill, got married last week. Non-restrictive. 2. My sister who lives in Muswell Hill got married last week. Restrictive. In the first sentence, you've only got one sister, so it must be a non-restrictive relative clause, and you're just giving some extra information. In the second sentence, you've got more than one sister, so it's a restrictive relative clause. So can you hear the difference in the pronunciation? I say it once more. My sister, who lives in Muswell Hill, got married last week. My sister who lives in Muswell Hill got married last week. Omitting the relative pronoun. As we saw in the graph that we looked at, you can only omit the relative pronoun in a restrictive relative clause. But when? Actually, it's pretty easy to see how. In fact, before I tell you, you see if you can discover the rule yourself from these three examples. So where can you omit the relative pronoun? Okay, so 3 examples where you can, 3 examples where you can't. Here, you can omit them. This is the typewriter that I wrote my first novel on. It's the most delicious donut that the world has ever seen. She's the girl who I went to dinner with. Here are 3 sentences where you can't omit the relative pronoun. This is the book that was made into a movie. I met a girl who speaks 12 languages. This was the evidence with which the criminal was convicted. Did you get it? I'm sure you did. You're brilliant. So the rule is, if the word directly after the relative pronoun, that, which, who or where, is a pronoun or a noun, you can omit it. If the word directly after the relative pronoun is a verb or a preposition, you can't omit it. Yes, it's that simple. If you want to express it another way, if the relative pronoun is not the subject of the relative clause, you can omit it. That's fine. However, I do think for most people, including myself, it's easy if you just look at the word after the relative pronoun, and if it's a verb or a preposition, you need it. But if it's a pronoun or noun, you can rub it out. And by the way, omitting the relative pronoun in this way is perfectly correct, both in formal and informal English. Back to prepositions. If the relative pronoun is preceded by a preposition, you cannot omit it. However, this can only be with which or whom. That or who cannot be used after a preposition. Let's look at an example. The chair on which I'm sitting is broken. You cannot omit which because it is preceded by a preposition. The table on I'm sitting is broken. No. However, as we saw earlier, on which can be changed to where. The chair where I'm sitting. Okay? If you want to have the same phrase but without the relative pronoun, you can still do it. How do you think? Put the preposition at the end of the clause, then you can omit the relative pronoun, which would be, in this case, the chair I'm sitting on, or the chair that I'm sitting on. Okay? It works in a similar way with whom and who. The girl from whom I got this donut. Okay? Whom cannot be omitted. It's after a preposition. From whom. So how can I rewrite the sentence and omit the relative pronoun? What do you think? Pause the video if necessary. Yes, you're brilliant. Put the preposition at the end and change whom to who. The girl who I got this donut from. But now we can omit the relative pronoun because it comes before a pronoun. The girl I got this donut from. Can I say the girl from who I got this donut? No, you can't. Never put who after a preposition. You must put it at the end. Can I say the girl whom I got this donut from? Grammatically yes, but stylistically no. If you insist on using whom, then keep it next to the preposition. Otherwise, you get what's called a dangling preposition, which is perfectly fine in English most of the time and even preferred, but not after whom. No, don't dangle your prepositions after whom. I'm warning you. Thank you, grammarians. I'm off to eat donuts now, and I suggest you do likewise. See you in the next video.